listen in. Okay. So we're looking in Parshat Vayeshev. We're going to start off as we usually do, looking at a couple of the psukim, asking a couple of questions, and from there we're going to go to the Midrash. We're looking at chapter 39, verse 7. So, chapter 39, verse 7. 39, chapter 39, verse 7. Okay. So, as usual, I apologize that I do not have the stone chumash with me, so I'll be reading from the translation I have in front of me. Okay. So first we got to give the context. The context is that Yosef has already been sold to Egypt by his brothers, and he is working in the house of one of the ministers, one of Paro's ministers. And then it says the following in verse 7. After these things, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he adamantly refused. He said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master concerns himself about nothing in the house, and whatever he has, he placed in my custody. There is no one greater in his house than I, and he has denied me nothing but you, since you are his wife. How then can I perpetrate this great evil and have sinned against God?" Okay, all of this is really to help us set the context. Okay, now we're at our verse. Okay, this is the verse that we will be discussing, and that the Midrash will be discussing, verse 10. And so it was, just as she coaxed Yosef day after day, but he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, to be with her. Then it goes on to say that a certain day came along, and no one else was in the house. His master's wife grabs him, demands that he sleep with her. He refuses. She then cries out, accusing him of trying to rape her. And we know how the story continues. Her master comes back. She tells him, she accuses Yosef in the ears of her husband, and then Yosef is thrown into the pit, to jail, and so on and so forth. But this is the verse that we are looking at, verse 10. Then I actually just lost it. I'm going to just find it again while you guys look at it. Verse 10 is the verse that the Midrash will be discussing. So let's just quickly read it again, and then we're going to look for questions. Okay, and so it was, just as she coaxed Yosef day after day, but he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, to be with her. Questions? Questions or observations? I'll open it up for both. So he's saying, why does it need to say, and it was when she coaxed him day after day? Okay, we will, the Midrash will actually focus on those words, okay? And you're right to notice those words. Those words are very important. But we'll see, the Midrash we'll see soon what the Midrash will do with it. And meaning the Midrash is very interested in that specific phrase. Any other questions or observations? Yes. So interesting. All right. I'm just going to repeat what you said for those because this is being taped online. So you're saying, especially considering, in light of what we see happening today in the area of, sexual harassment or sexual issues in the workplace, saying, considering that Yosef knows, he sees what's going on, why would he put himself in a situation where he would be putting himself in a situation where he might be compromised like that? So I think the simple answer to that is you're assuming he has any type of choice. We have to remember that although he does talk about the fact that he has the trust of his master, at the end of the day, he's a slave. He might be, have a slightly different status than a regular slave, but at the end of the day, he's still a slave. And my assumption is, I can't necessarily prove it from the text, is that he had very, very little choice about where to go, and if his master's wife wants him to serve her in her room every single day, I'm not sure he has any choice in the matter. Yes. Okay, so you're saying that you think that the phrase day after day is a significant phrase that is connected to other things in Yosef's life. You're right, but you're also wrong. Meaning, we're going to get to it soon. We'll see it in the Midrash. You're right that the phrase day after day is very significant. It is not a very common phrase, and we're going to see the Midrash is going to pick up on what you are saying, but it's going to connect it not to Yosef's life, it's going to connect it to someone else's life in Tanakh, in whose life that phrase, day after day, appears as well. But we're going to put that on hold just for a moment, but it is going to be the central theme of the Midrash as we're going to see it soon. Anyone else, any other questions or observations on the other phrases in the verse, in the pasuk? Anyone see anything? Yeah. Right. You're right. It is an interesting observation. I'll just repeat what Alex said, which is that, he's kind of asking, do we see anywhere else in Torah or Tanakh or in that time period a situation where a woman is seducing a man? Meaning, obviously, it's quite logical and would be expected, and as we see many times in Tanakh where a man is taking advantage of a woman, but this seems to be, so come to think of it, I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of another situation. What? Does someone have any ideas? I can't, off the top of my head, think of another situation. Lot's daughters. Yes, I guess so. I guess Lot's daughters could be somewhat similar. But over there's a very, very different, over there, it's very clearly not something that has to do with abuse or power or, taking advantage. At least from the simple reading of the text over there, it seems aimed very, very specifically at procreation because of a feeling that, the world is destroyed, and whether that makes sense that they thought that or not is a different question, but as far as the power balance there seems to be different. Although over there they do take somewhat advantage. They intoxicate him. But it's an interesting question, and obviously I think it's an interesting question to look at and to consider, considering many of the things that are in the media that's happening now. But interesting question. Yes. Yes. Excellent. Excellent. It actually says three phrases, right? It says, but he didn't listen to her. And didn't lie beside her or to be with her. There seems to be three different phrases of him saying no, or him, standing up to her, either internally, externally. So the Midrash this Midrash, I actually cut, what I'm about to tell you, I actually cut out of the Midrash that we're going to see because I felt we didn't have enough time for it. But the Midrash comes and says that she said to him, maybe just lie with me, but don't sleep with me. So the pasuk says, he didn't agree. Not only did he not agree to sleep with her, to actually sleep with her, but he also, didn't agree just to lie down with her. Because I guess the Midrash comes and says, obviously she asked for both of these things. One, lie down with me, actually lie down with me, not actually not to actually sleep together. And the other one was to actually, so that's what but I would come and say, and we'll touch upon this when we see the end of the Midrash. But you see what I see? There's three different phrases. And it seems to be reinforcing it. So, okay. We're going to, so the two things that we're pointing out is the repetition of the phrases, as you pointed out now, and what is the phrase day after day. That phrase of she said to him, one person saying to another person something day after day. From anywhere else in Tanakh, does it ring a bell? Does it seem like a familiar phrase? So Bracha beforehand tried to locate it by saying from Yosef's dealing with his brothers. So actually, no, it's not from there. We do not have the phrase day after day over there. Unless, again, if someone already looked at the source sheet and wants to, and wants to say what they saw there, that's fine. But does it sound familiar to anyone else? To anyone? From anywhere in Tanakh? By the way, every single person sitting in the room has seen this phrase somewhere else and sees it at least once a year. You just don't realize it. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is from Megillat Esther. So now we are going to see that in the Midrash, and we're going to come. Yes. Correct, with Haman. Okay, we're turning now to the Midrash. Okay, if you do not have a sheet, then hopefully you can either go online and look at it online, if or you can share with someone, or just listen up. The Midrash says the following: and much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, Rabbi Yudin, in the name of Rabbi Binyamin, said, the sons of Rachel, their Nisan is equal, and their greatness is equal. Now, the word that I just read here, I did not translate it because I don't know how to translate it. I'm going to first explain it the way what it seems to mean is the word Nisan seems to be from the word Nisayon. Nisayon means a trial, or Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Hello? Okay, we seem to have to reset the connection. So let's go ahead and try. Okay, for those of you who are watching live, we got disconnected for a moment from my class, so we've disconnected, and they're going to call back, and we will resume the shiur in just a moment. For those of you who are wondering what's going on, the connection with the class in Toronto was disconnected, so we're going to resume it in a moment. Okay, we are back. Okay, so we started to read the Midrash. I'm going to read it again from the beginning. And much as she coaxed Yosef day after day, Rabbi Yudin in the name of Rabbi Binyamin said, the sons of Rachel, their nisayon is equal and their greatness is equal. For those of you who are looking at the source sheet, it doesn't actually say nisayon. The word that the Midrash uses is nisan, which is difficult to understand what the Midrash is actually trying to say. We're going to initially explain it as Nisan from the word Nisayon. The word Nisayon means a test or a trial. Okay? So the Midrash seems to be saying the sons of Rachel, their trial or their test was equal, and their greatness or their ascent to greatness is equal. Now, who are the two sons of Rachel that the Midrash is talking about? We will see in a moment. Now, the Midrash goes to show how their trial that they had to withstand was equal. Their Nisan is equal, and much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, and on the other hand, and much as they coaxed him day after day. And as you said, this is taken from Megillat Esther, when the decree from the king came that everyone must bow down to Haman. Mordechai refuses, and it says that the servants of the king who were with Mordechai in the king's gate said to him every single day, why are you disobeying the king's decree? The Midrash goes on to say, another similarity, and he did not listen to her. Who is that talking about? Yosef did not listen to his master's wife, and equivalent to that, and he did not listen to them. Okay, Mordechai did not listen to them. Okay, so far it's showing that the test which they withstood was equal. In what way is it trying to show that their test was equal? How is it demonstrating that it's equal? How is the Midrash trying to demonstrate that the trial and the test that they had was equal? Wait. Well, wait. We have to hold on a second. He's saying that the similarity is that Joseph gave an explanation that if he were to sleep with her, he would be going against Hashem. But I have two issues with that. One, Mordechai gives no rationalization for why he refuses to listen. And secondly, the Midrash does not say what you're saying. I'll say again. Okay, well, listen. Let's remember that what we're focusing on is in what way is the Midrash a commentary. Okay, in what way is the Midrash acting as an actual commentary on the text? So, in what way is the Midrash claiming that they are equal tests? Yes. Okay, what else? It's not right. So they're both being asked day after day, and they both didn't do it. The Midrash is picking up here on, just very simply, on the language. The language that the Torah and the Megillah are using to describe the experience or the event is identical. Right? The phrase, as it coaxed him day after day, is a very specific phrase. The Midrash says the fact that this phrase appears just over here and over here is the text's way of connecting the events. This is called, there's a phrase for this, there's a term for this. It's called intertextuality. With it, Mordechai, yes. Yes. Right? No, we will get soon to the question that you're talking about, which is, what is the significance of this equation? But the first thing we always want to do is we want to understand, what is the commentator doing and how is he doing it? The next stage will be exactly what you're saying, Bracha, which is, why is the commentator doing this? What are the assumptions that are at the basis of this, of what it's saying? But so far we have that the trial that they withstood was the same, and how do we see this? Through the language. Okay? Identical language. Let's continue. And their ascent to greatness was equal. So now it's going to show how, just like their trial was equal, and they withstood a similar day after day and refused in the same way, their ascent to greatness as a consequence of withstanding the trial was similar as well. On the one hand, and Paro removed his ring, in Yosef's case, and the king removed his ring. Right? Same phrase. Right? It's identical. And he put it upon Yosef's hand, and he gave it to Mordechai. So not identical, but very similar. And he dressed him in clothes of fine linen. That's Yosef was dressed in clothes of fine linen. And on the other hand, and he dressed Mordechai. So you see, and he dressed. Next, and he put a gold chain upon his neck with Yosef, and Esther put Mordechai upon Haman's house. What do we think about that? That's not exactly the same, but it's still picking up on the language of, he put a gold chain upon his neck. Did he put something upon him? And Esther put Mordechai upon. That phrasing, and put and upon, appears again. He had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, right? Paro, once Yosef becomes important, he had him ride in the chariot of his second in command. And on the other hand, with Mordechai, and he had him ride on the horse in the city streets. Next stage, with Yosef, and they cried before him, Avrech. And with Mordechai, he cried before him, thus shall be done. Who called out? Haman, right? So you have here 5 or 6 different stages where the Midrash says, look, from, taking off the ring and giving it to the person, happens with both Mordechai and Yosef. Putting something physically upon him to show his status happens with Yosef and happens with Mordechai. Clothing him in fine clothes, to fit his new stature, happens in both of them. In both of them, they are elevated physically upon a horse or upon a chariot, and they are paraded around as a symbol of a status symbol. And both of them are Both of them are publicly acknowledged and called out in front of them in public to reflect their ascent to greatness. So, again, it is very, very clear. The Midrash is actually it's actually amazing how similar the stories are. Now, so we have here the Midrash picking up on the language. So we have this parallel phrasing. Anyone so far have any difficulties? Do we have any? Does this seem okay? Seems logical? Seems reasonable? Or are there any? I'm asking, are there any difficulties or any questions to ask about what the Midrash just did? Okay, so you're saying you're saying it would be understood. We would be able to understand what the Midrash is doing if we said that Mordechai was a reincarnation of Yosef. But why? But why would we say such a thing? What could possibly cause us to think that? Okay, so this leads us to our first question on the Midrash, which is: are their stories actually so similar? Because if we wanted to point out differences between the stories, again, the Midrash connects the language. Yes, the language is very, very similar. But if we wanted to point out in what way they are not the same, what would those be? Yes. Correct. The very, very crucial difference. Crucial difference is that there is absolutely no temptation, or almost no temptation, for Mordechai. Meaning for Yosef, there's a very clear temptation. The greatest temptation that exists. Sexual temptation. And whereas for Mordechai, you could say maybe there's a temptation of, I don't know, of keeping his honor. Not being maybe. But I don't think you could I don't think anyone would argue that he could compare, those two temptations. And think about it. Every single time Yosef refuses, it probably gets harder to refuse. Right? Because the temptation is there every day. Whereas Mordechai's temptation every day gets easier or harder? Meaning to Yosef to stand up to the test gets harder every day. Whereas Mordechai's gets easier because every day that he doesn't bow down, what happens? Nothing. Until one day, finally something happens. So they're not very similar trials. Even though the language is identical, they're not very similar tests. Yosef's seems to be a much more significant, much harder test. What? It's also harder because he's younger, probably. We'll get to that. We will get to that soon as well. Did someone else have something they wanted to say? Yes. Excellent point. Yosef was actually punished. There were consequences, negative consequences, which he actually experienced. Very immediate, very physical, right afterwards, because he did not, only years later, he also was elevated. Whereas Mordechai nothing actually happened. Something almost happened. But nothing actually happened. So you could say, that it's, when you're told, God forbid, that you're about to die, or all of your family's about to die, even if it doesn't end up happening, that's still a pretty serious consequence. But even so, you're right, the entire nation was at risk, and you're right, the fact that he is crying out in a great, anguish shows that this was not just that he did suffer from it, but who's to say that Mordechai had any clue that the reason for the Haman wanting to annihilate the Jews had anything to do with Mordechai not bowing down? Meaning, we know that, but there's nothing to indicate in the text that Mordechai would know that he was the reason. But even so, I accept what you're saying, Bracha, that even so, there were some consequences. Even so, I'd say that there were still some consequences. I'll accept that point. Okay, so I would say that we have two questions here. One is that Yosef's trial seems to be much more difficult, and the other one, which is the one I want to kind of open up and hear your thoughts. There's another thing here that we didn't pick up on. It says the sons of Rachel, their trial was similar, and their ascent to greatness was similar. What does the fact that they're the sons of Rachel have to do with anything? Meaning, how are they the sons of Rachel? Okay, Yosef is obviously the son of Rachel, and Mordechai, we know it is stated in the Megillah, he is a descendant of the tribe of Binyamin. Okay, so Binyamin is Rachel's second son. The Midrash seems to think that the fact that one could say, it's just pointing out that the two descendants had similar things happen to them. But that would only be the case if we think Midrash is not intentional. And everything that we've been doing for the last month and a half is saying that Midrash is very intentional. And Midrash is a commentary. And it comes and says, the experiences of let's see it again, the sons of Rachel, their trial is equal and the greatness is equal. So what is the significance? I'll put the question as follows. What is the significance of the fact that they are both the sons of Rachel? And the second question, which is, what is the significance? Why is the Midrash going to such great lengths to point out that their experiences are similar, or are equal or similar? What is the significance of these two stories being told? Look, these two stories, these two personalities are similar. So yes. Sivya, you had something to say? Okay, so pointing out that Yosef's nisayon, his test, was to do with adultery, and Mordechai's was to do with idolatry. He's saying those two sins are two, right? Those are the two of the big three no-nos, and therefore coming and saying, look, the temptation I guess maybe the temptation will have to do with adultery and idolatry are similar, and maybe it's not a coincidence that these two people who come from the same stock were able to withstand both. Okay, I think it's a reasonable answer. The difficulty, the challenge I would put for that, I think it's a reasonable answer. But we have to remember that in the text of the Megillah, it doesn't say anything about Mordechai refusing to bow down because of idolatry. right? That's a Midrash that it comes and says that on Haman's shoe there was a symbol of idolatry, and therefore bowing down to Haman was like committing idolatry. So I'm not saying that your answer is wrong, but I'm saying since this Midrash itself seems to be relying, and we'll see soon even more so, the degree to which this Midrash that we're dealing with right now is relying on the text itself, and only on what the text itself says, I think that we have to continue looking for another answer that doesn't rely on additional external sources. So we're looking, what we are looking for still is, what other similarities are there between Yosef and Mordechai, or between their stories, and what connection could there possibly be to Rachel in the experiences that these two people had? Yes. And how is that connected to Rachel? Okay, so let's. Okay. So I'd like to continue from that direction and suggest that we have to go back, and that very strange word that I refused to translate, that word that I refused to translate, we have to go back and look at it. And I looked at several versions of the Midrash, and in all of them it appears in the same way. It says their Nisan. Okay, their Nisan is equal, and their ascent to greatness is equal. And we explained it as their Nisayon, their trial and their test. But another way to understand it is from the word Nisan, literally would be their miracle. Okay, their miracle is the same, and their ascent to greatness is the same. Because we had a problem, which is that their trial, that the difficulty, meaning the situation that they were put into, is not the same. I think that I think it's very hard to argue that the trial of a 17-year-old boy, which we'll get to in a moment, we'll see the continuation of the Midrash, which is fascinating. We still have one more amazing thing to see in the Midrash. A 17-year-old slave is being given the opportunity, is being seduced day after day by his master's wife, which we know was to say that it was common in the ancient world for masters to sleep with their servants and mistresses to sleep with their servants. That was a life of a slave. And for him, he's not married, he doesn't have kids, he's a 17-year-old kid. For him to be able to withstand that temptation with no one seeing him, no one there, versus Mordechai, it seems that it's hard for me it is hard to equate, to come and say those are identical trials. Okay, one where in the privacy of the home when there's no one watching, versus in public when it's embarrassing to begin with to bow down to anyone or to lower and every single day that he refuses only reinforces the fact, for Mordechai that it's okay not to do it. Whereas you can imagine that every day that goes by, Mordechai's resolve gets stronger. Whereas you can imagine that Yosef's resolve day after day probably gets weaker, logically so. Then it's hard to say that it's exactly the same. And also their ascent to greatness is not really the same. Because Yosef becomes, we don't have time to go through it. If you were to look at each stage, you would see that also their ascent to greatness is not really the same. Yosef's trial was greater, and his ascent to greatness was greater. So it's not really the same. So one possible answer is to say, it's not equal, it's similar. But that seems very, very unsatisfying, because it seems the Midrash is going to great lengths to prove that the text itself, this is what we're focusing on today, intertextuality, that the text itself mirrors each other. And therefore, there must be something more than, oh wow, look, it's similar. The Midrash is proving to us that the Tanakh, that the author of the Megillah and the authors of the Torah are equating these stories, and therefore I would like to suggest that it's not Nisayon is equal, rather their miracle is equal. And what I mean by that is, and this is kind of fitting because we're about to get to Hanukkah. I'm not going to talk about Hanukkah, but I think what I'm going to say now might, if you think about it, might illuminate, no pun intended, something about Hanukkah as well. Which is, if you think about the connection to Rachel, what was Rachel's Nisayon? What situation was Rachel in when she was tested? Or when she had a trial, that she had a temptation that she had to overcome? What temptation did Rachel have to overcome? Correct. It was also about a relationship with a man. Right. Rachel had to give up the love of her life, so to say, yes. She had to be okay with allowing her sister to marry her intended, not knowing ahead of time that she would end up with him anyway. She could have just as easily not ended up with Yaakov. When she agreed to let her sister take her place, this was a tremendous and to overcome herself. And therefore I'm going to come and say that I think that the meaning of the word Nisan here is also Nisayon, which is a test, but I think the deeper meaning is Nes. The concept of Nes, of a miracle, again, in Hebrew it works better. In English, the word miracle is a bit of a different meaning. The word Nes, we understand the word Nes, is when the world as we know it, human nature, actual nature, the world as we know it is breached for something deeper. This is really the real meaning of the word Nes. When there's a breach that gives us a window into the deeper meaning of life, into understanding God's existence, or God's will, or God's providence. And that is why, by the way, and I'll just touch upon this just for 1 second, when we say that's, maybe we'll wait for this for next week to talk a little bit about revealed miracle and concealed miracle, or a nes galui, nes nistar, that the concept of a nes, the word nes in Hebrew literally means a flag. That's what the word nes actually means in Hebrew. It is something that draws our attention to something we didn't notice that was there. And I think what the Midrash is saying, the miracle of Yosef, of overcoming his nature, and the miracle of Mordechai overcoming his miracle, his situation of being able to stand up to the peer pressure and the fear of what might happen, that is equal. Because even though for any one person it might be harder to stand up to the sexual situation that Yosef was in than Mordechai's, a person having to overcome their weakness is the same. Overcoming your natural instincts, your natural inclinations. When a person is tempted, in Yosef's situation, sexual temptation, where no one will see and no one will judge and there will be no consequences, that goes against nature. That goes against physical nature and it goes against human nature. And the Midrash here is saying that is a bit of a miracle. That is a nes. And Mordechai being able to stand up to the fear of what will happen and the peer pressure of what everyone is saying and everyone is doing every day, that is a miracle. And both of these things reveal something about who Yosef is and reveal something about who Mordechai is, and they both reveal something about humanity. That it is possible to go against our nature. It is possible to go against our biology. It is possible. It's hard. And you know where it comes from? In this case, from Rachel, from their mother, who she herself, early on in life, did the same thing, was able to do something which is almost inconceivable to over. Can you imagine how difficult it was for her to give up after 7 years of being betrothed to this man who was in love with her and working for her and so on and so forth? It's unimaginable how difficult it must have been for her to overcome her feelings, emotions, whatever it was, for the sake of her sister. And it seems like it's saying that because of what Rachel did, and because Rachel not just was a model, but maybe engraved into her children, into the life of the Jewish people, but specifically her children, to the degree that even generations later, in Mordechai, this character trait, this miracle, and by the way, when I say miracle, I mean that yes, maybe one of the ways in which miracles happen in the world, one of the ways in which Hashem's miracles happen in the world, is through humans overcoming their own nature. When Yosef is able to stand up to this woman and not give in to the most basic natural instincts, this is a miracle carried out through the vehicle of human choice, but this is a miracle. This is a divine miracle. And through wait, just 1 second. And as a consequence of the human miracle, the divine miracle taking place through human overcoming, the redemption of the Jewish people happens. And through Mordechai doing a divine miracle through human carrying out a miracle, a divine miracle through human action, also a redemption of the Jewish people comes. The Midrash is saying when a human being is able to overcome some of the most powerful natural impulses for the sake of something greater, this is a miracle, and therefore, in these cases at least, it also results in major events. And this is the understanding that I am trying to present, that I think is hidden in the Midrash about what a miracle, about a nes is. A nes is something that humans can carry out, and that is called a miracle. Miracles happen through human vehicles. And what makes it a miracle is that through that activity, a much larger, much more significant event takes place. And that is what a nes is. It is a window into the deeper meaning of existence, of our existence as a people, of our destiny, of our story. Now, I know that I just went on a big monologue here. I want to read the last paragraph of the Midrash, because I think from a perspective of the methodology of the Midrash, it is phenomenal. Says the Midrash, a certain Roman matron asked Rabbi Yossi, is it really possible that Yosef, a young man of 17, resisted, look at this language, resisted all his heat and did this? We know, and the Midrash 1800 years ago knew very well the disposition of a 17-year-old teenager. It says, resisted all his heat and did this, meaning did what? Did not lie down with her and sleep with her. So this is what this non-Jewish matron, woman, says to Rabbi Yossi. Now look at this. This is unbelievable. When you talk about to what degree does Midrash, and we've spoken about this, does Midrash, how realistic is the world of Midrash? To what degree did the rabbis of Midrash live in the world of realism? Rabbi Yossi took out the book of Bereshit and began reading for her the stories of Reuven and Bilhah, Yehuda and Tamar. So these are two stories that appear in Sefer Bereshit of sexual indiscretion, where it says that Reuven slept with his father's wife, Bilhah, and that Yehuda slept with his daughter-in-law when he thought she was a prostitute. So Rabbi Yossi says to her, let's see, look, he opens up the Chumash for her and says, look, there are two other stories before the story of Yosef, where we see, look, he said, if with those adults and under their father's authority, the scripture did not hide their misdeed, right? Those two, Reuven was an adult when he slept with Bilhah, and Yehuda was definitely an adult, okay, when he slept with his daughter-in-law, and they were both living near their father, so they both were adults and had a religious and paternal authority figure in their life. So look what he says. If with those adults and under their father's authority, the scripture did not hide their misdeed, with this one, not an adult, and by himself, all the more so, it would have revealed his misdeed. What is the logic the Midrash is using to prove that it makes sense that Yosef did not sleep with her? What is the logic the Midrash is using? Yes, so let me just repeat. Let me just repeat what you said. So you answered my question of how is the Midrash proving that the story of Yosef standing up or to temptation is logical, It's using a magnificent logic, saying, look, the Torah has no problem very explicitly admitting that the figures of Tanakh, these great personalities that are these figures that our whole faith is based on, the Torah has no qualms in other places pointing out their sexual indiscretions. And therefore, we should, just like we believe the Torah that Yehuda slept with his daughter-in-law thinking she was a prostitute, and just like we should take the text at face value that Reuven slept with one of his father's wives, therefore we should believe the text that it has no interest, no agenda in covering up Yosef's sexual indiscretion, if there was one. So I find there to be several phenomenal things about this. Again, this whole Midrash, both parts of it, are very, and this is something that is important for me to do because we're trying to understand how Midrash works, is again using intertextuality, is using the text of the Torah and of Tanakh to explain the Torah, both with looking at the similar words between the story of Yosef and the story of Mordechai, and by negating the explicit way in which the sexual indiscretions are told earlier, and the degree to which now it is, right? So in one of them it's by comparing, saying, look, it's similar, and the other one saying, look, the two stories are different. But the Midrash here, 1800 years ago, is using a very, very advanced method of textual analysis, of literary analysis, to understand the story, looking at equal phrases somewhere else, and therefore connecting the themes and the storylines, and the other by negating it with another part of with a different text, and therefore validating the accuracy or the fact that the text here is logical. It also, and this is also a very important point, there's an assumption here that Midrash has, is that all of Torah and all of Tanakh is a unified text. Because if I'll say that again, the Midrash is assuming that all of Torah and all of Tanakh is a unified text. Otherwise, how could you bring proof to the story of Yosef from the story of Mordechai? The equal phrasing is only significant if you assume that this is one text, coming from the same source, written by the same people, or codified by the same, canonized by the same people. And although it's something that we just assume, we see it here in the Midrash in action. And that's a very, very important point. And to see this, and this is a very, very, this is almost, you would think this to be a very, very modern method of analyzing text, comparing and contrasting the text here in two different ways, comparing it to one text and contrasting it with another one to understand what's happening here. And as Bracha, as you said, I agree that this is just a further validation to the explanation that we gave to how amazing it is that this 17-year-old teenager, without the authority, without an authority figure in his life, is able, against any logic. It would be like saying, okay, excuse the example I'm going to bring, that you can take a 17-year-old teenager, give him a cell phone with free Wi-Fi access, and alone for an extended period of time with no one having any access to his cell phone to see what he used it for. Okay? And any normal person would say, impossible, not logical, against human nature, against biology, that teenager will not use that in order to see, and that is a very logical argument. Right? That is a very, very logical argument. Anyone who has a teenage son would sign off on that. Probably not only a teenage son. And that this addition of the Midrash at the end just reinforces the fact that what the Midrash is really talking about is the human miracle that manifests itself through the trials of people having to deal with going against their nature, their natural inclination, and this is what a miracle is: overcoming nature. And in this case, overcoming their own human nature. And what makes it a miracle is the fact that through that, because of that, is revealed something very deep, not only about human nature, but it becomes a window becomes a vehicle for eventually a much, much bigger thing, which is the redemption of the Jewish people in Yosef's time, the redemption of the Jewish people in Mordechai's time. And basically what we're saying is, I'm just going to summarize the two important things for me in this whole thing. One, to see the methodology of the Midrash, the intertextuality that it uses, and how much its perspective is one of realism, of using the text on it and its face value. And the deeper thing that's going on here, the miracle that happens through human choice. And what makes it a miracle is that through the withstanding of the overcoming of the human nature, that becomes a vehicle for something far, far deeper and far, far greater in the bigger story of the Jewish people. Any questions or comments, I'm happy to take. So the question was, I'll just repeat the question. Based on what I'm saying, would it be true to say that, the famous, kind of experiment, you give a child a marshmallow, and if he doesn't eat it, then, comes back in 2 minutes and he still has the marshmallow, he gets another one. Or every time that we stand up to any kind of temptation, would that be defined as a miracle? So I would say to some degree, yes. Now the question is, what I was saying is, what makes something a miracle is what is revealed. Right in Hebrew it's a nes, it's a flag. What is revealed about you, or about human nature, or about the Jewish people through the choice that you make to overcome your natural instinct? So there's a lot of different levels. So when you do not eat that second piece of chocolate, or the chocolate at all, okay, then this reveals something important, but its significance might be very, very limited to a very certain time, very certain situation. But it seems to be that when certain people are in certain situations during certain times, then their ability to overcome has much, much larger ramifications. I like to use the example of when David Ben-Gurion stood up and decided to declare a state of Israel, knowing that 7 nations are going to attack, So this was an example of this was a miracle, because you had one person who was willing to take upon himself that all of that responsibility, and was not afraid, and was willing to risk everything, with everything that was involved. And it was actually on his head. It was actually his decision. He was the deciding vote in a balance between an equal vote, and it was his decision to not accept a temporary ceasefire, or to postpone the declaration. So yes, many of us have found ourselves in situations where we have had to be brave and take a risk and make a decision that was scary and that involved tremendous amount of risk. But when we did it, it influenced us, maybe our family, and that will have certain repercussions. When David Ben Gurion does it in that certain time, in that certain place, the significance of his choice, of his miracle, or the miracle that is happening through his choice, it reverberates through 70 years later, and throughout all of history, and throughout all of humanity, throughout the world. So maybe the test that he withstood and you withstood with the chocolate is the same, but the circumstances are different. The situation is different. The location is different. But yes. Right. 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 So you're quoting a text which says that it is appropriate for a person whenever a person eats or drinks to leave a portion of his desire on the side, meaning to never satiate your desire, even when it's permitted. Okay. Eshar koach. Thank you, everyone. Shavua tov. Something to reflect on.